Chapter 13 of Silas Marner by George Eliot. This recording is in the public domain. It was after the early supper time at the Red House, and the entertainment was in that stage when bashfulness itself had passed into easy jollity, when gentlemen conscious of unusual accomplishments could at length be prevailed on to dance a hornpipe, and when the squire preferred talking loudly, scattering snuff, and patting his visitor's back, to sitting longer at the whist-table, a choice exasperating to Uncle Kimble, who, being always volatile in sober business hours, became intense and bitter over cards and brandy, shuffled before his adversary's deal with a glare of suspicion, and turned up a mean trump-card with an air of inexpressible disgust, as if, in a world where such things could happen, one might as well enter on a course of reckless profligacy. When the evening had advanced to this pitch of freedom and enjoyment, it was usual for the servants, the heavy duties of supper being well over, to get their share of amusement by coming to look on at the dancing, so that the back regions of the house were left in solitude. There were two doors by which the white parlour was entered from the hall, and they were both standing open for the sake of air, but the lower one was crowded with the servants and villagers, and only the upper doorway was left free. Bob Cass was figuring in a hornpipe, and his father, very proud of his lithe son, whom he repeatedly declared to be just like himself in his young days, in a tone that implied this to be the very highest stamp of juvenile merit, was the centre of a group who had placed themselves opposite the performer, not far from the upper door. Godfrey was standing a little way off, not to admire his brother's dancing, but to keep sight of Nancy, who was seated in the group near her father. He stood aloof because he wished to avoid suggesting himself as a subject for the squire's fatherly jokes in connection with matrimony and Miss Nancy Lammeter's beauty, which were likely to become more and more explicit. But he had the prospect of dancing with her again when the hornpipe was concluded, and in the meanwhile it was very pleasant to get long glances at her quite unobserved. But when Godfrey was lifting his eyes from one of those long glances, they encountered an object as startling to him at that moment as if it had been an apparition from the dead. It was an apparition from that hidden life which lies, like a dark by-street, behind the goodly ornamented façade that meets the sunlight and the gaze of respectable admirers. It was his own child, carried in Silas Marner's arms. That was his instantaneous impression, unaccompanied by doubt, though he had not seen the child for months past, and when the hope was rising that he might possibly be mistaken, Mr. Crackenthorp and Mr. Lammeter had already advanced to Silas, in astonishment at this strange advent. Godfrey joined them immediately, unable to rest without hearing every word, trying to control himself, but conscious that if any one noticed him they must see that he was white-lipped and trembling. But now all eyes at that end of the room were bent on Silas Marner. The squire himself had risen, and asked angrily, "How's this? What's this? What do you do coming in here in this way?" "I'm come for the doctor. I want the doctor," Silas had said in the first moment to Mr. Crackenthorp. "Why, what's the matter, Marner?" said the rector. "The doctor's here, but say quietly what you want him for." "It's a woman," said Silas, speaking low and half breathlessly, just as Godfrey came up. "She's dead, I think. Dead in the snow at the stone pits, not far from my door." Godfrey felt a great throb. There was one terror in his mind at that moment. It was that the woman might not be dead. That was an evil terror, an ugly inmate to have found a nestling place in Godfrey's kindly disposition. But no disposition is a security from evil wishes to a man whose happiness hangs on duplicity. "Hush, hush," said Mr. Crackenthorp. "Go out into the hall there. I'll fetch the doctor for you. Found a woman in the snow, and think she's dead," he added, speaking low to the squire. "Better say as little about it as possible. It will shock the ladies. Just tell them a poor woman is ill from cold and hunger. I'll go and fetch Kimble." By this time, however, the ladies had pressed forward, curious to know what could have brought the solitary linen weaver there under such strange circumstances, and interested in the pretty child, who, half alarmed and half attracted by the brightness and the numerous company, now frowned and hid her face, now lifted up her head again and looked round placably, until a touch or a coaxing word brought back the frown, and made her bury her face with new determination. "What child is it?" said several ladies at once, and among the rest Nancy Lammeter, addressing Godfrey. "I don't know. Some poor woman's been found in the snow, I believe. was the answer Godfrey wrung from himself with a terrible effort. After all, am I certain? He hastened to add, silently, in anticipation of his own conscience. "Why, you'd better leave the child here then, Master Marner," said good-natured Mrs. Kimble, hesitating, however, to take those dingy clothes into contact with her own ornamented satin bodice. "I'll tell one of the girls to fetch it." "No, no, I can't part with it. I can't let it go," said Silas abruptly. "It's come to me. I've a right to keep it." The proposition to take the child from him had come to Silas quite unexpectedly, and his speech, uttered under a strong sudden impulse, was almost like a revelation to himself. A minute before he had no distinct intention about the child. "Did you ever hear the like?" said Mrs. Kimble, in mild surprise, to her neighbour. "Now, ladies, I must trouble you to stand aside," said Mr. Kimble, coming from the card-room, in some bitterness at the interruption, but drilled by the long habit of his profession into obedience to unpleasant calls, even when he was hardly sober. "It's a nasty business turning out now, eh, Kimble?" said the squire. "He might have gone for your young fellow, the apprentice there, what's his name?" "Might? Ah, what's the use of talking about might?" growled Uncle Kimble, hastening out with Marner, and followed by Mr. Crackenthorp and Godfrey. "Get me a pair of thick boots, Godfrey, will you? And stay, let somebody run to Winthrop's and fetch Dolly. She's the best woman to get. Ben was here himself before supper. Is he gone?" "Yes, sir, I met him," said Marner. "But I couldn't stop to tell him anything, only I said I was going for the doctor, and he said the doctor was at the squire's, and I made haste and ran, and there was nobody to be seen at the back of the house, so I went into where the company was." The child, no longer distracted by the bright light and the smiling women's faces, began to cry and call for mammy, though always clinging to Marner, who had apparently won her thorough confidence. Godfrey had come back with the boots, and felt the cry as if some fibre were drawn tight within him. "I'll go," he said hastily, eager for some movement. "I'll go and fetch the woman, Mrs. Winthrop." "Oh, pooh! Send somebody else," said Uncle Kimble, hurrying away with Marner. "You'll let me know if I can be of any use, Kimble," said Mr. Crackenthorp, but the doctor was out of hearing. Godfrey too had disappeared. He was gone to snatch his hat and coat, having just reflection enough to remember that he must not look like a madman. But he rushed out of the house into the snow without heeding his thin shoes. In a few minutes he was on his rapid way to the stone pits by the side of Dolly, who, though feeling that she was entirely in her place in encountering cold and snow on an errand of mercy, was much concerned at a young gentleman's getting his feet wet under a like impulse. "You'd a deal better go back, sir," said Dolly, with respectful compassion. "You've no call to catch cold. And I'd ask you if you'd be so good as to tell my husband to come on your way back. He's at the Rainbow, no doubt, if you find him anyway sober enough to be of use, or else does Mrs. Snell happen to send up the boy to fetch and carry, for there may be things wanted from the doctor's." "No, I'll stay, now I'm once out. I'll stay outside here," said Godfrey, when they came opposite Marner's cottage. "You can come and tell me if I can do anything." "Well, sir, you're very good. You've a tender heart," said Dolly, going to the door. Godfrey was too painfully preoccupied to feel a twinge of self-reproach at this undeserved praise. He walked up and down, unconscious that he was plunging ankle-deep in snow, unconscious of everything but trembling suspense about what was going on in the cottage, and the effect of each alternative on his future lot. No, not quite unconscious of everything else. Deeper down, and half smothered by passionate desire and dread, there was the sense that he ought not to be waiting on those alternatives, that he ought to accept the consequences of his deeds, own the miserable wife, and fulfil the claims of the helpless child. But he had not moral courage enough to contemplate that act of renunciation of Nancy as possible for him. He had only conscience and heart enough to make him forever uneasy under the weakness that forbade the renunciation. And at this moment his mind leapt away from all restraint towards a sudden prospect of deliverance from his long bondage. "Is she dead?" said the voice that predominated over every other within him. "If she is, I may marry Nancy, and then I shall be a good fellow in future, and have no secrets, and the child shall be taken care of somehow." But across that vision came the other possibility: "She may live, and then it's all up with me." Godfrey never knew how long it was before the door of the cottage opened and Mr. Kimble came out. He went forward to meet his uncle, prepared to suppress the agitation he must feel, whatever news he was to hear. "I waited for you, as I'd come so far," he said, speaking first. "Pooh! It was nonsense for you to come out. Why didn't you send one of the men? There's nothing to be done. She's dead—has been dead for hours, I should say." "What sort of woman is she?" said Godfrey, feeling the blood rush to his face. "A young woman, but emaciated, with long black hair. Some vagrant, quite in rags. She's got a wedding ring on, however. They must fetch her away to the workhouse to-morrow. Come along." "I want to look at her," said Godfrey. "I think I saw such a woman yesterday. I'll overtake you in a minute or two." Mr. Kimble went on, and Godfrey turned back to the cottage. He cast only one glance at the dead face on the pillow, which Dolly had smoothed with decent care. But he remembered that last look at his unhappy, hated wife so well, that at the end of 16 years every line in the worn face was present to him when he told the full story of this night. He turned immediately towards the hearth, where Silas Marner sat lulling the child. She was perfectly quiet now, but not asleep, only soothed by sweet porridge and warmth into that wide gazing calm which makes us older human beings, with our inward turmoil, feel a certain awe in the presence of a little child, such as we feel before some quiet majesty or beauty in the earth or sky, before a steady glowing planet, or a full-flowered eglantine, or the bending trees over a silent pathway. The wide-open blue eyes looked up at Godfrey's without any uneasiness or sign of recognition. The child could make no visible audible claim to his father, and the father felt a strange mixture of feelings, a conflict of regret and joy, that the pulse of that little heart had no response for the half-jealous yearning in his own, when the blue eyes turned away from him slowly and fixed themselves on the weaver's queer face, which was bent low to look at them, while the small hand began to pull Marner's withered cheek with loving disfiguration. "You'll take the child to the parish to-morrow?" asked Godfrey, speaking as indifferently as he could. "Who says so?" said Marner sharply. "Will they make me take her?" "Why, you wouldn't like to keep her, should you? An old bachelor like you?" "Till anybody shows they've a right to take her away from me," said Marner. "The mother's dead, and I reckon it's got no father. It's a lone thing, and I'm a lone thing. My money's gone, I don't know where, and this came from I don't know where. I know nothing. I'm partly mazed." "Poor little thing," said Godfrey. "Let me give something towards finding it clothes." He had put his hand in his pocket and found half a guinea, and, thrusting it into Silas's hand, he hurried out of the cottage to overtake Mr. Kimble. "Ah, I see it's not the same woman I saw," he said, as he came up. "It's a pretty little child. The old fellow seems to want to keep it. That's strange for a miser like him, but I gave him a trifle to help him out. The parish isn't likely to quarrel with him for the right to keep the child." "No, but I've seen the time when I might have quarrelled with him for it myself. It's too late now, though. If the child ran into the fire, your aunt's too fat to overtake it. She could only sit and grunt like an alarmed sow. But what a fool you are, Godfrey, to come out in your dancing shoes and stockings in this way, and you one of the beaux of the evening, and at your own house. What do you mean by such freaks, young fellow? Has Miss Nancy been cruel, and do you want to spite her by spoiling your pumps?" "Oh, everything has been disagreeable to-night. I was tired to death of jigging and gallanting, and that bother about the hornpipes. And I'd got to dance with the other Miss Gunn," said Godfrey, glad of the subterfuge his uncle had suggested to him. The prevarication and white lies which a mind that keeps itself ambitiously pure is as uneasy under as a great artist under the false touches that no eye detects but his own, are worn as lightly as mere trimmings when once the actions have become a lie. Godfrey reappeared in the white parlour with dry feet, and, since the truth must be told, with a sense of relief and gladness that was too strong for painful thoughts to struggle with. For could he not venture now, whenever opportunity offered, to say the tenderest things to Nancy Lammeter, to promise her and himself that he would always be just what she would desire to see him? There was no danger that his dead wife would be recognized. Those were not days of active inquiry and wide report, and as for the registry of their marriage, that was a long way off, buried in unturned pages, away from every one's interest but his own. Dunsey might betray him if he came back, but Dunsey might be won to silence. And when events turn out so much better for a man than he has had reason to dread, is it not a proof that his conduct has been less foolish and blameworthy than it might otherwise have appeared? When we are treated well, we naturally begin to think that we are not altogether unmeritorious, and that it is only just that we should treat ourselves well, and not mar our own good fortune. Where, after all, would be the use of his confessing the past to Nancy Lammeter, and throwing away his happiness, nay, hers? For he felt some confidence that she loved him. As for the child, he would see that it was cared for. He would never forsake it. He would do everything but own it. Perhaps it would be just as happy in life without being owned by its father, seeing that nobody could tell how things would turn out, and that, is there any other reason wanted? Well then, that the father would be much happier without owning the child. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Silas Marner by George Eliot. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. There was a pauper's burial that week in Raveloe, and up Kent Yard at Batherley it was known that the dark-haired woman with the fair child, who had lately come to lodge there, was gone away again. That was all the express note taken that Molly had disappeared from the eyes of men. But the unwept death, which to the general lot seemed as trivial as the summer shed leaf, was charged with the force of destiny to certain human lives that we know of, shaping their joys and sorrows even to the end. Silas Marner's determination to keep the tramp's child was matter of hardly less surprise and iterated talk in the village than the robbery of his money. That softening of feeling towards him which dated from his misfortune, that merging of suspicion and dislike in a rather contemptuous pity for him as lone and crazy, was now accompanied with a more active sympathy, especially amongst the women. Notable mothers who knew what it was to keep children whole and sweet, lazy mothers who knew what it was to be interrupted in folding their arms and scratching their elbows by the mischievous propensities of children just firm on their legs, were equally interested in conjecturing how a lone man would manage with a 2-year-old child on his hands, and were equally ready with their suggestions, the notable chiefly telling him what he had better do, and the lazy ones being emphatic in telling him what he would never be able to do. Among the notable mothers, Dolly Winthrop was the one whose neighbourly offices were the most acceptable to Marner, for they were rendered without any show of bustling instruction. Silas had shown her the half-guinea given to him by Godfrey, and asked her what should be done about getting some clothes for the child. Master Marner," said Dolly, "there's no call to buy no more nor a pair of shoes, for I've got the little petticoats as Aaron wore 5 years ago, and it's ill spending the money on them baby clothes, for the child'll grow like the grass in May, bless it, that it will." And the same day Dolly brought her bundle, and displayed to Marner, one by one, the tiny garments in their due order of succession, most of them patched and darned, but clean and neat as fresh-sprung herbs. This was the introduction to a great ceremony with soap and water, from which baby came out in a new beauty, and sat on Dolly's knee, handling her toes and chuckling, and patting her palms together with an air of having made several discoveries about herself, which she communicated by alternate sounds of gug, 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 and mammy. The mammy was not a cry of need or uneasiness. Baby had been used to utter it without expecting either tender sound or touch to follow. "Anybody'd think the angels in heaven couldn't be prettier," said Dolly, rubbing the golden curls and kissing them. "And to think of its being covered with them dirty rags. And the poor mother froze to death. But there's them as took care of it and brought it to your door, Master Marner. The door was open, and it walked in over the snow like as if it had been a little starved robin. Didn't you say the door was open?" "Yes," said Silas meditatively. "Yes, the door was open. The money's gone I don't know where, and this came from I don't know where." He had not mentioned to any one his unconsciousness of the child's entrance, shrinking from questions which might lead to the fact he himself suspected, namely, that he had been in one of his trances. "Ah," said Dolly, with soothing gravity, "it's like the night and the morning, and the sleeping and the waking, and the rain and the harvest, One goes and the other comes, and we know nothing how nor where. We may strive and scrat and fend, but it's little we can do after all. The big things come and go with no striving o' our own. They do, that they do. And I think you're in the right on it to keep the little un, Master Marner, seeing as it's been sent to you, though there's folks as thinks different. You'll happen be a bit moithered with it while it's so little, but I'll come and welcome and see to it for you. I've a bit of time to spare most days, for when one gets up betimes o' the morning, the clock seems to stand still toward 10, afore it's time to go about the victual. So, as I say, I'll come and see to the child for you, and welcome. "Thank you, kindly," said Silas, hesitating a little. "I'll be glad if you'll tell me things, but," he added uneasily, leaning forward to look at baby with some jealousy, as she was resting her head backward against Dolly's arm, and eyeing him contentedly from a distance, "but I want to do things for it myself, else it may get fond o' somebody else, and not fond o' me. I've been used to fending for myself in the house. I can learn." "Eh, to be sure," said Dolly gently. "I've seen men as are wonderful handy with children. The men are awkward and contrary mostly, God help 'em, but when the drink's out of 'em they aren't unsensible, though they're bad for leeching and bandaging, so fiery and impatient. You see, this goes first next to the skin," proceeded Dolly, taking up the little shirt and putting it on. "Yes," said Marner docilely, bringing his eyes very close so that they might be initiated in the mysteries, whereupon baby seized his head with both her small arms, and put her lips against his face with purring noises. "See there," said Dolly, with a woman's tender tact, "she's fondest o' you. She wants to go to your lap, I'll be bound. Go then, take her, Master Marner. You can put the things on, and then you can say as you've done for her from the first of her coming to you." Marner took her on his lap, trembling with an emotion mysterious to himself, at something unknown dawning on his life. Thought and feeling were so confused within him that if he had tried to give them utterance he could only have said that the child was come instead of the gold, that the gold had turned into the child. He took the garments from Dolly and put them on under her teaching, interrupted of course by baby's gymnastics. "There then. Why, you make it quite easy, Master Marner," said Dolly. "But what shall you do when you're forced to sit in your loom? For she'll get busier and mischievouser every day. She will, bless her. It's lucky you've got that high hearth instead of a grate, for that keeps the fire more out of her reach. But if you've got anything as can be spilt or broke, or as is fit to cut her fingers off, she'll be at it, and it is but right you should know." Silas meditated a little while in some perplexity. "I'll tie her to the leg of the loom," he said at last. "Tie her with a good long strip o' something." "Well, mayhap that'll do, as it's a little girl, for they're easier persuaded to sit i' one place nor the lads. I know what the lads are, for I've had four I've had, God knows, and if you was to take 'em and tie 'em up, they'd make a fighting and a crying as if you was ringing the pigs. But I'll bring you my little chair, and some bits of red rag and things for her to play with, and she'll sit and chatter to them as if they was alive. Eh, if it wasn't a sin to the lads to wish 'em made different, bless 'em, I should ha' been glad for one of 'em to be a little girl. And to think as I could ha' taught her to scour and mend, and the knitting and everything. But I can teach 'em to this little one, Master Marner, when she gets old enough." "But she'll be my little un," said Marner, rather hastily. "She'll be nobody else's." "No, to be sure, you'll have a right to her if you're a father to her, and bring her up according. But," added Dolly, coming to a point which she had determined beforehand to touch upon, "you must bring her up like christened folks' children, and take her to church, and let her learn the catechise, as my little Aaron can say off, the I believe and everything, and hurt nobody by word or deed, as well as if he was the clerk. That's what you must do, Master Marner, if you'd do the right thing by the orphan child." Marner's pale face flushed suddenly under a new anxiety. His mind was too busy trying to give some definite bearing to Dolly's words for him to think of answering her. "And it's my belief," she went on, "as the poor little creature has never been christened, and it's nothing but right as the parson should be spoke to. And if you was no ways unwilling, I'd talk to Mr. Macey about it this very day. For if the child ever went anyways wrong, and you hadn't done your part by it, Master Marner, inoculation and everything to save it from harm, it 'ud be a thorn in your bed for ever o' this side of the grave. And I can't think as it 'ud be easy lying down for anybody when they'd got to another world, if they hadn't done their part by the helpless children as come without their own asking." Dolly herself was disposed to be silent for some time now, for she had spoken from the depths of her own simple belief, and was much concerned to know whether her words would produce the desired effect upon Silas. He was puzzled and anxious, for Dolly's word "christened" conveyed no distinct meaning to him. He had only heard of baptism, and had only seen the baptism of grown-up men and women. "What is it you mean by christened?" he said at last, timidly. "Won't folks be good to her without it?" "Oh, dear, dear, Master Marner," said Dolly, with gentle distress and compassion. "Had you never no father nor mother as taught you to say your prayers, and as there's good words and good things to keep us from harm?" "Yes," said Silas, in a low voice, "I know a deal about that. I used to. But your ways are different. My country was a good way off." He paused a few moments, and then added more decidedly, "But I want to do everything as can be done for the child, and whatever's right for it in this country, and you think it'll do her good, I'll act accordingly, if you'll tell me." "Well then, Master Marner," said Dolly, inwardly rejoiced, "I'll ask Mr. Macey to speak to the parson about it. And you must fix on a name for it, because it must have a name give it when it's christened." "My mother's name was Hepzibah," said Silas, "and my little sister was named after her." "Hey, that's a hard name," said Dolly. "I partly think it isn't a christened name." "It's a Bible name," said Silas, old ideas recurring. "Then I've no call to speak again it," said Dolly, rather startled by Silas's knowledge on this head. "But you see I'm no scholar, and I'm slow at catching the words. My husband says I'm always acting as if I was putting the haft for the handle. That's what he says, for he's very sharp, God bless him. But it was awkward calling your little sister by such a hard name, when you've got nothing big to say, like, wasn't it, Master Marner?" "We called her Eppie," said Silas. "Well, if it was no ways wrong to shorten the name, it 'ud be a deal handier. And so I'll go now, Master Marner, and I'll speak about the christening afore dark, and I wish you the best o' luck. And it's my belief as it'll come to you if you do what's right by the orphan child. And there's the inoculation to be seen to. And as to washing its bits o' things, you need look to nobody but me, for I can do 'em with one hand when I've got my suds about. Eh, the blessed angel! You let me bring my Aaron one of these days, and he'll show her his little cart as his father made for him, and the black and white pup as he's got a rearing." Baby was christened, the rector deciding that a double baptism was the lesser risk to incur; and on this occasion Silas, making himself as clean and tidy as he could, appeared for the first time within the church, and shared in the observances held sacred by his neighbours. He was quite unable, by means of anything he heard or saw, to identify the Raveloe religion with his old faith. If he could at any time in his previous life have done so, it must have been by the aid of a strong feeling ready to vibrate with sympathy, rather than by a comparison of phrases and ideas. And now for long years that feeling had been dormant. He had no distinct idea about the baptism and the church-going, except that Dolly had said it was for the good of the child; and in this way, as the weeks grew to months, the child created fresh and fresh links between his life and the lives from which he had hitherto shrunk continually into narrower isolation. Unlike the gold, which needed nothing, and must be worshipped in close-locked solitude, which was hidden away from the daylight, was deaf to the song of birds, and started to no human tones, Eppie was a creature of endless claims and ever-growing desires, seeking and loving sunshine, and living sounds, and living movements, making trial of everything with trust in new joy, and stirring the human kindness in all eyes that looked on her. The gold had kept his thoughts in an ever-repeated circle, leading to nothing beyond itself. But Eppie was an object compacted of changes and hopes that forced his thoughts onward, and carried them far away from their old eager pacing towards the same blank limit, carry them away to the new things that would come with the coming years, when Eppie would have learned to understand how her father Silas cared for her, and made him look for images of that time in the ties and charities that bound together the families of his neighbours. The gold had asked that he should sit weaving longer and longer, deafened and blinded more and more to all things except the monotony of his loom and the repetition of his web. But Eppie called him away from his weaving, and made him think all its pauses a holiday, reawakening his senses with her fresh life, even to the old winter flies that came crawling forth in the early spring sunshine, and warming him into joy because she had joy. And when the sunshine grew strong and lasting, so that the buttercups were thick in the meadows, Silas might be seen in the sunny midday, or in the late afternoon when the shadows were lengthening under the hedgerows, strolling out with uncovered head to carry Eppie beyond the stone pits to where the flowers grew, till they reached some favourite bank where he could sit down while Eppie toddled to pluck the flowers, and make remarks to the winged things that murmured happily above the bright petals, calling Dad's attention continually by bringing him the flowers. Then she would turn her ear to some sudden bird note, and Silas learned to please her by making signs of hushed stillness, that they might listen for the note to come back again, so that when it came she set up her small back and laughed with gurgling triumph. Sitting on the banks in this way, Silas began to look for the once familiar herbs again, and as the leaves, with their unchanged outline and markings, lay on his palm, there was a sense of crowding remembrances from which he turned away timidly, taking refuge in Eppie's little world that lay lightly on his enfeebled spirit. As the child's mind was growing into knowledge, his mind was growing into memory. As her life unfolded, his soul, long stupefied in a cold, narrow prison, was unfolding too, and trembling gradually into full consciousness. It was an influence which must gather force with every new year. The tone that stirred Silas's heart grew articulate, and called for more distinct answers. Shapes and sounds grew clearer for Eppie's eyes and ears, and there was more that Dad was imperatively required to notice and account for. Also, by the time Eppie was 3 years old, she developed a fine capacity for mischief, and for devising ingenious ways of being troublesome, which found much exercise, not only for Silas's patience, but for his watchfulness and penetration. Sorely was poor Silas puzzled on such occasions by the incompatible demands of love. Dolly Winthrop told him that punishment was good for Eppie, and that, as for rearing a child without making it tingle a little in soft and safe places now and then, it was not to be done. "To be sure, there's another thing you might do, Master Marner," added Dolly meditatively. "You might shut her up once i' the coal-hole. That's what I did wi' Aaron, for I was that silly wi' the youngest lad as I could never bear to smack him. Not as I could find in my heart to let him stay i' the coal-hole more nor a minute, but it was enough to colly him all over, so as he must be new washed and dressed, and it was as good as a rod to him, that was. But I put it upo' your conscience, Master Marner, as there's one of 'em you must choose, either smacking or the coal-hole, else she'll get so masterful there'll be no holding her." Silas was impressed with the melancholy truth of this last remark, but his force of mind failed before the only two penal methods open to him, not because it was painful to him to hurt Eppie, but because he trembled at a moment's contention with her, lest she should love him the less for it. Let even an affectionate Goliath get himself tied to a small tender thing, dreading to hurt it by pulling, and dreading still more to snap the cord, and which of the two, pray, will be master? It was clear that Eppie, with her short toddling steps, must lead Father Silas a pretty dance on any fine morning when circumstances favoured mischief. For example, he had wisely chosen a broad strip of linen as a means of fastening her to his loom when he was busy. It made a broad belt round her waist, and was long enough to allow of her reaching the truckle bed and sitting down on it, but not long enough for her to attempt any dangerous climbing. One bright summer's morning Silas had been more engrossed than usual in setting up a new piece of work, an occasion on which his scissors were in requisition. These scissors, owing to a special warning of Dolly's, had been kept carefully out of Eppie's reach, but the click of them had had a peculiar attraction for her ear, and watching the results of that click, she had derived the philosophical lesson that the same cause would produce the same effect. Silas had seated himself in his loom, and the noise of weaving had begun, but he had left his scissors on a ledge which Eppie's arm was long enough to reach. And now, like a small mouse watching her opportunity, she stole quietly from her corner, secured the scissors, and toddled to the bed again, setting up her back as a mode of concealing the fact. She had a distinct intention as to the use of the scissors, and having cut the linen strip in a jagged but effectual manner, in 2 moments she had run out the open door where the sunshine was inviting her, while poor Silas believed her to be a better child than usual. It was not until he happened to need his scissors that the terrible fact burst upon him. Eppie had run out by herself, had perhaps fallen into the stone pit. Silas, shaken by the worst fear that could have befallen him, rushed out, calling "Eppie!" and ran eagerly about the unenclosed space, exploring the dry cavities into which she might have fallen, and then gazing with questioning dread at the smooth red surface of the water. The cold drops stood on his brow. How long had she been out? There was one hope, that she had crept through the stile and got into the fields where he habitually took her to stroll. But the grass was high in the meadow, and there was no descrying her if she was there, except by a close search that would be a trespass on Mr. Osgood's crop. Still, that misdemeanour must be committed, and poor Silas, after peering all round the hedgerows, traversed the grass, beginning with perturbed vision to see Eppie behind every group of red sorrel, and to see her moving always farther off as he approached. The meadow was searched in vain, and he got over the stile into the next field, looking with dying hope towards a small pond which was now reduced to its summer shallowness, so as to leave a wide margin of good adhesive mud. Here, however, sat Eppie, discoursing cheerfully to her own small boot, which she was using as a bucket to convey the water into a deep hoof-mark, while her little naked foot was planted comfortably on a cushion of olive-green mud. A red-headed calf was observing her with alarmed doubt through the opposite hedge. Here was clearly a case of aberration in a christened child, which demanded severe treatment. But Silas, overcome with convulsive joy at finding his treasure again, could do nothing but snatch her up and cover her with half-sobbing kisses. It was not until he had carried her home, and had begun to think of the necessary washing, that he recollected the need that he should punish Eppie and make her remember. The idea that she might run away again and come to harm gave him unusual resolution, and for the first time he determined to try the coal-hole, a small closet near the hearth. "Naughty, naughty Eppie," he suddenly began, holding her on his knee, and pointing to her muddy feet and clothes. "Naughty to cut with the scissors and run away. Eppie must go in the coal-hole for being naughty. Daddy must put her in the coal-hole." He half expected that this would be shock enough, and that Eppie would begin to cry; but instead of that she began to shake herself on his knee, as if the proposition opened a pleasing novelty. Seeing that he must proceed to extremities, he put her into the coal-hole and held the door closed, with a trembling sense that he was using a strong measure. For a moment there was silence, but then came a little cry, "Uppy, Uppy!" and Silas let her out again, saying, "Now, Eppie'll never be naughty again, else she must go in the coal-hole, a black naughty place." The weaving must stand still a long while this morning, for now Eppie must be washed and have clean clothes on; but it was to be hoped that this punishment would have a lasting effect, and save time in future, though perhaps it would have been better if Eppie had cried more. In half an hour she was clean again, and Silas, having turned his back to see what he could do with the linen band, threw it down again with the reflection that Eppie would be good without fastening for the rest of the morning. He turned round again, and was going to place her in her little chair near the loom, when she peeped out at him with black face and hands again, and said, "Eppie in the toll-hole." This total failure of the coal-hole discipline shook Silas's belief in the efficacy of punishment. "She'd take it all for fun," he observed to Dolly, "if I didn't hurt her, and I can't do that, Mrs. Winthrop. If she makes me a bit of trouble I can bear it, and she's got no tricks but what she'll grow out of." "Well, that's partly true, Master Marner," said Dolly sympathetically, "and if you can't bring your mind to frighten her off touching things, you must do what you can to keep 'em out of her way. That's what I do with the pups as the lads are allays a-rearing. They will worry and gnaw they will, if it was one Sunday cap as hung anywhere so as they could drag it. They know no difference, God help 'em. It's the pushing o' the teeth as sets 'em on, that's what it is." So Eppie was reared without punishment, the burden of her misdeeds being borne vicariously by Father Silas. The stone hut was made a soft nest for her, lined with downy patience, and also in the world that lay beyond the stone hut she knew nothing of frowns and denials. Notwithstanding the difficulty of carrying her and his yarn or linen at the same time, Silas took her with him on most of his journeys to the farmhouses, unwilling to leave her behind at Dolly Winthrop's, who was always ready to take care of her. And little curly-headed Eppie, the weaver's child, became an object of interest at several outlying homesteads as well as in the village. Hitherto he had been treated very much as if he had been a useful gnome or brownie, a queer and unaccountable creature, who must necessarily be looked at with wondering curiosity and repulsion, and with whom one would be glad to make all greetings and bargains as brief as possible, but who must be dealt with in a propitiatory way, and occasionally have a present of pork or garden stuff to carry home with him, seeing that without him there was no getting the yarn woven. But now Silas met with open smiling faces and cheerful questioning, as a person whose satisfactions and difficulties could be understood. Everywhere he must sit a little and talk about the child, and words of interest were always ready for him. "Ah, Master Marner, you'll be lucky if she takes the measles soon and easy." Or, "Why, there isn't many lone men 'ud ha' been wishing to take up with a little un like that. But I reckon the weaving makes you handier than men as do outdoor work. You're partly as handy as a woman, for weaving comes next to spinning." Elderly masters and mistresses, seated observantly in large kitchen armchairs, shook their heads over the difficulties attendant on rearing children, felt Eppie's round arms and legs, and pronounced them remarkably firm, and told Silas that if she turned out well, which, however, there was no telling, it would be a fine thing for him to have a steady lass to do for him when he got helpless. Servant maidens were fond of carrying her out to look at the hens and chickens, or to see if any cherries could be shaken down in the orchard, and the small boys and girls approached her slowly, with cautious movement and steady gaze, like little dogs face to face with one of their own kind, till attraction had reached the point at which the soft lips were put out for a kiss. No child was afraid of approaching Silas when Eppie was near him. There was no repulsion around him now, either for young or old, for the little child had come to link him once more with the whole world. There was love between him and the child that blent them into one, and there was love between the child and the world, from men and women with parental looks and tones to the red ladybirds and the round pebbles. Silas began now to think of Raveloe life entirely in relation to Eppie. She must have everything that was good in Raveloe, and he listened docilely, that he might come to understand better what this life was, from which for 15 years he had stood aloof as from a strange thing, with which he could have no communion, as some man who has a precious plant to which he would give a nurturing home in a new soil thinks of the rain and the sunshine and all influences in relation to his nursling, and asks industriously for all knowledge that will help him to satisfy the wants of the searching roots, or to guard leaf and bud from invading harm. The disposition to hoard had been utterly crushed at the very first by the loss of his long-stored gold. The coins he earned afterwards seemed as irrelevant as stones brought to complete a house suddenly buried by an earthquake. The sense of bereavement was too heavy upon him for the old thrill of satisfaction to arise again at the touch of the newly earned coin. And now something had come to replace his hoard which gave a growing purpose to the earnings, drawing his hope and joy continually onward beyond the money. In old days there were angels who came and took men by the hand and led them away from the city of destruction. We see no white-winged angels now, but yet men are led away from threatening destruction. A hand is put into theirs, which leads them forth gently towards a calm and bright land, so that they look no more backward, and the hand may be a little child's. End of chapter 14. Of Silas Marner by George Eliot. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. There was one person, as you will believe, who watched with keener though more hidden interest than any other the prosperous growth of Eppie under the weaver's care. He dared not do anything that would imply a stronger interest in a poor man's adopted child than could be expected from the kindliness of the young squire, when a chance meeting suggested a little present to a simple old fellow whom others noticed with good will. But he told himself that the time would come when he might do something towards furthering the welfare of his daughter without incurring suspicion. Was he very uneasy in the meantime at his inability to give his daughter her birthright? I cannot say that he was. The child was being taken care of, and would very likely be happy, as people in humble stations often are, happier perhaps than those brought up in luxury. That famous ring that pricked its owner when he forgot duty and followed desire, I wonder if it pricked very hard when he set out on the chase, or whether it pricked but lightly then, and only pierced to the quick when the chase had long been ended, and hope, folding her wings, looked backward and became regret. Godfrey Cass's cheek and eye were brighter than ever now. He was so undivided in his aims that he seemed like a man of firmness. No Dunsey had come back. People had made up their minds that he was gone for a soldier, or gone out of the country, and no one cared to be specific in their inquiries on a subject delicate to a respectable family. Godfrey had ceased to see the shadow of Dunsey across his path, and the path now lay straight forward to the accomplishment of his best, longest cherished wishes. Everybody said Mr. Godfrey had taken the right turn, and it was pretty clear what would be the end of things, for there were not many days in the week that he was not seen riding to the Warrens. Godfrey himself, when he was asked jocosely if the day had been fixed, smiled with the pleasant consciousness of a lover who could say yes if he liked. He felt a reformed man, delivered from temptation, and the vision of his future life seemed to him as a promised land, for which he had no cause to fight. He saw himself with all his happiness centred on his own hearth, while Nancy would smile on him as he played with the children. And that other child, not on the hearth, he would not forget it. He would see that it was well provided for. That was a father's duty. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Silas Marner by George Eliot. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2. It was a bright autumn Sunday, 16 years after Silas Marner had found his new treasure on the hearth. The bells of the old Raveloe church were ringing the cheerful peal which told that the morning service was ended, and out of the arched doorway in the tower came slowly, retarded by friendly greetings and questions, the richer parishioners who had chosen this bright Sunday morning as eligible for church-going. It was the rural fashion of the time for the more important members of the congregation to depart first, while their humbler neighbours waited and looked on, stroking their bent heads or dropping their curtsies to any large ratepayer who turned to notice them. Foremost among these advancing groups of well-clad people, there were some whom we shall recognise in spite of time, who has laid his hand on them all. The tall blond man of 40 is not much changed in feature from the Godfrey Cass of 26. He is only fuller in flesh, and has only lost the indefinable look of youth, a loss which is marked even when the eye is undulled and the wrinkles are not yet come. Perhaps the pretty woman, not much younger than he, who is leaning on his arm, is more changed than her husband. The lovely bloom that used to be always on her cheek now comes but fitfully, with a fresh morning air, or with some strong surprise. Yet to all who love human faces best for what they tell of human experience, Nancy's beauty has a heightened interest. Often the soul is ripened into fuller goodness while age has spread an ugly film, so that mere glances can never divine the preciousness of the fruit. But the years have not been so cruel to Nancy. The firm yet placid mouth, the clear voracious glance of the brown eyes, speak now of a nature that has been tested and has kept its highest qualities, and even the costume, with its dainty neatness and purity, has more significance now the coquetries of youth have nothing to do with it. Mr. and Mrs. Godfrey Cass, any higher title has died away from Raveloe lips, since the old squire was gathered to his fathers and his inheritance was divided, have turned round to look for the tall aged man and the plainly dressed woman who are a little behind, Nancy having observed that they must wait for father and Priscilla, and now they all turn into a narrower path leading across the churchyard, into a small gate opposite the Red House. We will not follow them now, for may there not be some others in this departing congregation whom we should like to see again, some of those who are not likely to be handsomely clad, and whom we may not recognise so easily as the master and mistress of the Red House. But it is impossible to mistake Silas Marner. His large brown eyes seem to have gathered a longer vision, as is the way with eyes that have been short-sighted in early life, and they have a less vague, a more answering gaze. But in everything else one sees signs of a frame much enfeebled by the lapse of the 16 years. The weaver's bent shoulders and white hair give him almost the look of advanced age, though he is not more than 55. But there is the freshest blossom of youth close by his side, a blonde, dimpled girl of 18, who has vainly tried to chastise her curly auburn hair into smoothness under her brown bonnet. The hair ripples as obstinately as a brooklet under the March breeze, and the little ringlets burst away from the restraining comb behind and show themselves below the bonnet crown. Eppie cannot help being rather vexed about her hair, for there is no other girl in Raveloe who has hair at all like it, and she thinks hair ought to be smooth. She does not like to be blameworthy even in small things. You see how neatly her prayer-book is folded in her spotted handkerchief. That good-looking young fellow in a new fustian suit who walks behind her is not quite sure upon the question of hair in the abstract when Eppie puts it to him, and thinks that perhaps straight hair is the best in general, but he doesn't want Eppie's hair to be different. She surely divines that there is some one behind her who is thinking about her very particularly, and mustering courage to come to her side as soon as they are out in the lane, else why should she look rather shy, and take care not to turn her head away from her father Silas, to whom she keeps murmuring little sentences as to who was at church and who was not at church, and how pretty the red mountain ash is over the rectory wall. "I wish we had a little garden, father, with double daisies in like Mrs. Winthrop's," said Eppie, when they were out in the lane. "Only they say it'd take a deal of digging and bringing fresh soil, and you couldn't do that, could you, father? Anyhow, I shouldn't like you to do it, for it'd be too hard work for you." "Yes, I could do it, child, if you want a bit of garden. These long evenings I could work at taking in a little bit o' the waste, just enough for a root or two of flowers for you. And again in the morning I could have a turn with the spade before I sat down to the loom. Why didn't you tell me before as you wanted a bit of garden?" "I can dig it for you, Master Marner," said the young man in fustian, who was now by Eppie's side, entering into the conversation without the trouble of formalities. "It'll be play to me after I've done my day's work, or any odd bits of time when the work's slack. And I'll bring some soil from Mr. Cass's garden. He'll let me, and willin'." Aaron, my lad, are you there?" said Silas. "I wasn't aware of you, for when Eppie's talking of things I can see nothing but what she's a-saying. Well, if you could help me with the digging, we might get her a bit of garden all the sooner." "Then, if you think well and good," said Aaron, "I'll come to the Stone pits this afternoon, and we'll settle what's to be taken in, and I'll get up an hour earlier the morning and begin on it." "But not if you don't promise me not to work at the hard digging, father," said Eppie, "for I shouldn't have said anything about it," she added, half bashfully, half roguishly, "only Mrs. Winthrop said as Aaron 'ud be so good, and—" "And you might ha' known it without mother telling you," said Aaron. "And Master Marner knows too, I hope, as I'm able and willing to do a turn of work for him, and he won't do me the unkindness to any ways take it out of my hands." "There now, father, you won't work on it till it's all easy," said Eppie, "and you and me can mark out the beds, and make holes and plant roots. It'll be a deal livelier at the Stone pits when we've got some flowers, for I always think the flowers can see us and know what we're talking about. And I'll have a bit of rosemary and bergamot and thyme, because they're so sweet-smelling. But there's no lavender, only in the gentlefolks' gardens, I think." "That's no reason why you shouldn't have some," said Aaron, "for I can bring you slips of anything. I'm forced to cut no end of 'em when I'm gardening, and throw 'em away mostly. There's a big bed of lavender at the Red House. The missus is very fond of it." "Well," said Silas gravely, "so as you don't make free for us, or ask for anything as is worth much at the Red House. For Mr. Cass has been so good to us, and built up the new end of the cottage, and given us beds and things, as I couldn't abide to be imposing for garden stuff or anything else." "Well, no, there's no imposing," said Aaron. "There's never a garden in all the parish but what there's endless waste in it for want of somebody as could use everything up. It's what I think to myself sometimes, as there need nobody run short of victuals if the land was made the most on, and there was never a morsel but what could find its way to a mouth. It sets one thinking o' that, gardening does. But I must go back now, else mother'll be in trouble as I aren't there." "Bring her with you this afternoon, Aaron," said Eppie. "I shouldn't like to fix about the garden, and her not know everything from the first. Should you, father?" "Aye, bring her if you can, Aaron," said Silas. "She's sure to have a word to say as'll help us to set things on the right end." Aaron turned back up the village, while Silas and Eppie went on up the lonely sheltered lane. "Oh, Daddy," she began, when they were in privacy, clasping and squeezing Silas's arm, and skipping round to give him an energetic kiss. "My little old Daddy, I'm so glad. I don't think I shall want anything else when I've got a little garden. And I knew Aaron would dig it for us," she went on with roguish triumph. "I knew that very well." "You're a deep little puss, you are," said Silas, with the mild passive happiness of love-crowned age in his face. "But you'll make yourself fine and beholden to Aaron." "Oh no, I shan't," said Eppie, laughing and frisking. "He likes it." "Come, come, let me carry your prayer book, else you'll be dropping it jumping it that way." Eppie was now aware that her behaviour was under observation, but it was only the observation of a friendly donkey, browsing with a log fastened to his foot. A meek donkey, not scornfully critical of human trivialities, but thankful to share in them, if possible, by getting his nose scratched. And Eppie did not fail to gratify him with her usual notice, though it was attended with the inconvenience of his following them painfully up to the very door of their home. But the sound of a sharp bark inside, as Eppie put the key in the door, modified the donkey's views, and he limped away again without bidding. The sharp bark was the sign of an excited welcome that was awaiting them from a knowing brown terrier, who, after dancing at their legs in a hysterical manner, rushed with a worrying noise at a tortoise-shell kitten under the loom, and then rushed back with a sharp bark again, as much as to say, "I have done my duty by this feeble creature, you perceive," while the lady mother of the kitten sat sunning her white bosom in the window, and looked round with a sleepy air of expecting caresses, though she was not going to take any trouble for them. The presence of this happy animal life was not the only change which had come over the interior of the stone cottage. There was no bed now in the living room, and the small space was well filled with decent furniture, all bright and clean enough to satisfy Dolly Winthrop's eye. The oaken table and three-cornered oaken chair were hardly what was likely to be seen in so poor a cottage. They had come, with the beds and other things, from the Red House. For Mr. Godfrey Cass, as every one said in the village, did very kindly by the weaver, and it was nothing but right that a man should be looked on and helped by those who could afford it, when he had brought up an orphan child, and had been father and mother to her, and had lost his money too, so as he had nothing but what he worked for week by week, and when the weaving was going down too, for there was less and less flax spun, and Master Marner was none so young. Nobody was jealous of the weaver, for he was regarded as an exceptional person, whose claims on neighbourly help were not to be matched in Raveloe. Any superstition that remained concerning him had taken an entirely new colour, and Mr. Macey, now a very feeble old man of 66, never seen except in his chimney corner or sitting in the sunshine at his door sill, was of opinion that when a man had done what Silas had done by an orphan child, it was a sign that his money would come to light again, or leastwise that the robber would be made to answer for it, for, as Mr. Macey observed of himself, his faculties were as strong as ever. Silas sat down now and watched Eppie with a satisfied gaze, as she spread the clean cloth and set on it the potato pie, warmed up slowly in a safe Sunday fashion, by being put into a dry pot over a slow-dying fire, as the best substitute for an oven. For Silas would not consent to have a grate and oven added to his conveniences. He loved the old brick hearth as he had loved his brown pot, and was it not there when he had found Eppie? The gods of the hearth exist for us still, and let all new faith be tolerant of that fetishism, lest it bruise its own roots. Silas ate his dinner more silently than usual, soon laying down his knife and fork, and watching half abstractedly Eppie's play with Snap and the cat, by which her own dining was made rather a lengthy business. Yet it was a sight that might well arrest wandering thoughts. Eppie, with the rippling radiance of her hair and the whiteness of her rounded chin and throat set off by the dark blue cotton gown, laughing merrily as the kitten held on with her 4 claws to one shoulder, like a design for a jug-handle, while Snap on the right hand and Puss on the other put up their paws towards a morsel which she held out of reach of both, Snap occasionally desisting in order to remonstrate with the cat by a cogent worrying growl on the greediness and futility of her conduct, till Eppie relented, caressing them both, and divided the morsel between them. But at last Eppie, glancing at the clock, checked the play, and said, "Oh, Daddy, You're wanting to go into the sunshine to smoke your pipe. But I must clear away first, so as the house may be tidy when godmother comes. I'll make haste, I won't be long." Silas had taken to smoking a pipe daily during the last 2 years, having been urged to it by the sages of Raveloe as a practice good for the fits; and this advice was sanctioned by Dr. Kimble, on the ground that it was as well to try what could do no harm, a principle which was made to answer for a great deal of work in that gentleman's medical practice. Silas did not highly enjoy smoking, and often wondered how his neighbours could be so fond of it, but a humble sort of acquiescence in what was held to be good had become a strong habit of that new self which had been developed in him since he had found Eppie on his hearth. It had been the only clue his bewildered mind could hold by in cherishing this young life that had been sent to him out of the darkness into which his gold had departed. By seeking what was needful for Eppie, by sharing the effect that everything produced on her, he had himself come to appropriate the forms of custom and belief which were the mould of Raveloe life; and as, with reawakening sensibilities, memory also reawakened, he had begun to ponder over the elements of his old faith, and blend them with his new impressions, till he recovered a consciousness of unity between his past and present. The sense of presiding goodness and the human trust which come with all pure peace and joy had given him a dim impression that there had been some error, some mistake, which had thrown that dark shadow over the days of his best years; and as it grew more and more easy to him to open his mind to Dolly Winthrop, he gradually communicated to her all he could describe of his early life. The communication was necessarily a slow and difficult process, for Silas's meagre power of explanation was not aided by any readiness of interpretation in Dolly, whose narrow outward experience gave her no key to strange customs, and made every novelty a source of wonder that arrested them at every step of the narrative. It was only by fragments, and at intervals which left Dolly time to resolve what she had heard till it acquired some familiarity to her, that Silas at last arrived at the climax of the sad story, the drawing of lots, and its false testimony concerning him. And this had to be repeated in several interviews, under new questions on her part as to the nature of this plan for detecting the guilty and clearing the innocent. "Man, yourn's the same Bible, you're sure of that, Master Marner? The Bible as you brought with you from that country is the same as what we've got at the church, and what Eppie's a learning to read in?" "Yes," said Silas, "every bit the same. And there's drawing of lots in the Bible, mind you," he added in a lower tone. "Oh, dear, dear," said Dolly in a grieved voice, as if she were hearing an unfavourable report of a sick man's case. She was silent for some minutes. At last she said, "There's wise folks, happen, as know how it all is. The parson knows, I'll be bound. But it takes big words to tell them things, and such as poor folks can't make much out on. I can never rightly know the meaning of what I hear at church, only a bit here and there, but I knows it's good words, I do. But what lies upon your mind, it's this, Master Marner, as if them above have done the right thing by you, they'd never ha' let you be turned out for a wicked thief when you was innocent." "Ah," said Silas, who had now come to understand Dolly's phraseology, "that was what fell on me like as if it had been a red-hot iron, because, you see, there was nobody as cared for me or clave to me above nor below, and him as I'd gone out and in with for 10 year and more, since we was lads and went halves, my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, had lifted up his heel again me and worked to ruin me. But he was a bad un. I can't think as there's another such," said Dolly. "But a more come, Master Marner. I'm like as if I'd waked and didn't know whether it was night or morning. I feel somehow sure as I do when I've laid something up, though I can't justly put my hand on it, as there's a rights in what happened to you, if one could but make it out. And you'd no call to lose heart as you did. But we'll talk on it again, for sometimes things come into my head when I'm leeching or poulticing or such, as I could never think on when I was sitting still." Dolly was too useful a woman not to have many opportunities of illumination of the kind she alluded to, and she was not long before she recurred to the subject. "Master Marner," she said one day that she came to bring home Eppie's washing, "I've been sore puzzled for a good bit with that trouble o' yourn and the drawing o' lots, and it got twisted back'ards and forwards as I didn't know which end to lay hold on. But it come to me all clear like that night when I was sitting up with poor Bessie Fawkes, as is dead and left her children behind, God help 'em. It came to me as clear as daylight. But whether I've got hold on it now, or can anyways bring it to my tongue's end, that I don't know. For I've often a deal inside me as'll never come out, and for what you talk o' your folks in your old country never saying prayers by heart nor saying 'em out of a book, they must be wonderful clever. For if I didn't know Our Father and little bits o' words as I can carry out o' church with me, I might down on my knees every night, but nothing could I say." "But you can mostly say something as I can make sense on, Mrs. Winthrop," said Silas. "Well then, Master Marner, it came to me summat like this. I can make nothing of the drawing o' lots and the answer coming wrong. It'd mayhap take the parson to tell that, and he could only tell it us i' big words. But what came to me as clear as daylight, it was when I was troubling over poor Bessie Fawkes, and it always comes into my head when I'm sorry for folks, and feel as if I can't do a power to help 'em, not if I was to get up i' the middle o' the night. It comes into my head as them above has got a deal tenderer heart nor what I've got. For I can't be anyways better nor them as made me, and if anything looks hard to me, it's because there's things I don't know on, and for the matter o' that, there may be plenty o' things I don't know on, for it's little as I know, that it is. And so, while I was thinking o' that, you came into my mind, Master Marner, and it all came pouring in. If I felt in my inside what was the right and just thing by you, and them as prayed and drawn the lots, all but the wicked un, if they'd ha' done the right thing by you if they could, isn't there them as was at the making on us, as knows better and has a better will? And that's all as ever I can be sure on, and everything else is a big puzzle to me when I think on it. For there was the fever came and took off them as were full growed, and left the helpless children, and there's the breaking o' limbs, and them as 'ud do right and be sober have to suffer by them as are contrairy. There's trouble i' the world, and there's things as we can never make out the rights on. And all as we've got to do is to trust in, Master Marner, to do the right thing as far as we know, and to trust in. For if us as know so little can see a bit o' good and rights, we may be sure there's a good and a rights bigger nor what we can know. I feel it in my inside as it must be so. And if you could but ha' gone on trusting, Master Marner, you wouldn't ha' run away from your fellow creatures and been so lone." "Ah, but that 'ud ha' been hard," said Silas, in an undertone. "It 'ud ha' been hard to trust in then." "And so it would," said Dolly, almost with compunction. "Them things are easier said nor done, and I'm partly ashamed o' talking." "Nay, nay," said Silas, "you're in the right, Mrs. Winthrop, you're in the right. There's good i' this world, I've a feeling o' that now. And it makes a man feel as there's a good more nor he can see, i' spite o' the trouble and the wickedness. That drawing o' the lots is dark, but the child was sent to me. There's dealings with us, there's dealings." This dialogue took place in Eppie's earlier years, when Silas had to part with her for 2 hours every day, that she might learn to read at the dame school, after he had vainly tried himself to guide her in that first step to learning. Now that she was grown up, Silas had often been led, in those moments of quiet outpouring which come to people who live together in perfect love, to talk with her too of the past, and how and why he had lived a lonely man until she had been sent to him. For it would have been impossible for him to hide from Eppie that she was not his own child, even if the most delicate reticence on the point could have been expected from Raveloe gossips in her presence. Her own questions about her mother could not have been parried, as she grew up, without that complete shrouding of the past which would have made a painful barrier between their minds. So Eppie had long known how her mother had died on the snowy ground, and how she herself had been found on the hearth by Father Silas, who had taken her golden curls for his lost guineas brought back to him. The tender and peculiar love with which Silas had reared her in almost inseparable companionship with himself, aided by the seclusion of their dwelling, had preserved her from the lowering influences of the village talk and habits, and had kept her mind in that freshness which is sometimes falsely supposed to be an invariable attribute of rusticity. Perfect love has a breath of poetry which can exalt the relations of the least instructed human beings, and this breath of poetry had surrounded Eppie from the time when she had followed the bright gleam that beckoned her to Silas's hearth, so that it is not surprising if, in other things besides her delicate prettiness, she was not quite a common village maiden, but had a touch of refinement and fervour which came from no other teaching than that of tenderly nurtured, unvitiated feeling. She was too childish and simple for her imagination to rove into questions about her unknown father, For a long while it did not even occur to her that she must have a father; and the first time that the idea of her mother having had a husband presented itself to her was when Silas showed her the wedding ring which had been taken from the wasted finger, and had been carefully preserved by him in a little lacquered box shaped like a shoe. He delivered this box into Eppie's charge when she had grown up, and she often opened it to look at the ring; but still she thought hardly at all about the father of whom it was the symbol. Had she not a father very close to her, who loved her better than any real fathers in the village seemed to love their daughters? On the contrary, who her mother was, and how she came to die in that forlornness, were questions that often pressed on Eppie's mind. Her knowledge of Mrs. Winthrop, who was her nearest friend next to Silas, made her feel that a mother must be very precious, and she had again and again asked Silas to tell her how her mother looked, whom she was like, and how he had found her against the furze bush, led towards it by the little footsteps and the outstretched arms. The furze bush was there still, and this afternoon, when Eppie came out with Silas into the sunshine, it was the first object that arrested her eyes and thoughts. "Father," she said, in a tone of gentle gravity, which sometimes came like a sadder, slower cadence across her playfulness, "we shall take the furze bush into the garden. It'll come into the corner, and just against it I'll put snowdrops and crocuses, 'cause Aaron says they won't die out, but'll always get more and more." "Ah, child," said Silas, always ready to talk when he had his pipe in his hand, apparently enjoying the pauses more than the puffs, "it wouldn't do to leave out the furze bush. And there's nothing prettier to my thinking when it's yellow with flowers. But it's just come into my head what we're to do for a fence. Mayhap Aaron can help us to a thought. But a fence we must have, else the donkeys and things will come and trample everything down. And fencing's hard to be got at by what I can make out." "Oh, I'll tell you, Daddy," said Eppie, clasping her hands suddenly after a minute's thought. "There's lots of loose stones about, some of 'em not big, and we might lay 'em atop one another and make a wall. You and me could carry the smallest, and Aaron 'ud carry the rest, I know he would." "Eh, my precious un," said Silas, "there isn't enough stones to go all round; and as for you carrying, why, with your little arms you couldn't carry a stone no bigger than a turnip. You're delicate made, my dear," he added, with a tender intonation. "That's what Mrs. Winthrop says." "Oh, I'm stronger than you think, Daddy," said Eppie; "and if there wasn't enough stones to go all round, why, they'll do part of the way, and then it'll be easier to get sticks and things for the rest. See here, round the big pit, what a many stones!" She skipped forward to the pit, meaning to lift one of the stones and exhibit her strength, but she started back in surprise. "Oh, father, just come and look here," she exclaimed. "Come and see how the water's gone down since yesterday. Why, yesterday the pit was ever so full." "Well, to be sure," said Silas, coming to her side. "Why, that's the draining they've begun on since harvest, in Mr. Osgood's fields, I reckon. The foreman said to me the other day when I passed by him, 'Master Marner,' he said, 'I shouldn't wonder if we lay your bit of waste as dry as a bone.' It was Mr. Godfrey Cass, he said, had gone into the draining. He'd been taking the fields of Mr. Osgood." "How odd it'll be to have the old pit dried up," said Eppie, turning away, and stooping to lift rather a large stone. "See, Daddy, I can carry this quite well," she said, going along with much energy for a few steps, but presently letting it fall. "Ah, you're fine and strong, aren't you?" said Silas, while Eppie shook her aching arms and laughed. "Come, come, let us go and sit down on the bank against the stile here, and have no more lifting. You might hurt yourself, child. You'd need have somebody to work for you, and my arm isn't over strong." Silas uttered the last sentence slowly, as if it implied more than met the ear; and Eppie, when they sat down on the bank, nestled close to his side, and taking hold caressingly of the arm that was not over strong, held it on her lap, while Silas puffed again dutifully at the pipe which occupied his other arm. The ash in the hedgerow behind made a fretted screen from the sun, and threw happy playful shadows all about them. "Father," said Eppie, very gently, after they had been sitting in silence a little while, "if I was to be married, ought I to be married with my mother's ring?" Silas gave an almost imperceptible start, though the question fell in with the undercurrent of thought in his own mind, and then said, in a subdued tone, "Why, Eppie, have you been a thinking on it?" "Only this last week, father," said Eppie, ingenuously. since Aaron talked to me about it." "And what did he say?" said Silas, still in the same subdued way, as if he were anxious lest he should fall into the slightest tone that was not for Eppie's good. "He said he should like to be married, because he was a going in 24, and had got a deal of gardening work now Mr. Mott's given up. And he goes twice a week reg'lar to Mr. Cass's, and once to Mr. Osgood's, and they're going to take him on at the rectory." "And who is it he's wanting to marry?" said Silas, with rather a sad smile. "Why, me, to be sure, Daddy," said Eppie, with dimpling laughter, kissing her father's cheek, "as if he'd want to marry anybody else." "And you mean to have him, do you?" said Silas. "Yes, some time," said Eppie. "I don't know when. Everybody's married some time, Aaron says. But I told him that wasn't true, for I said, look at father, he's never been married." "No, child," said Silas. "Your father was a lone man till you was sent to him." "But you'll never be lone again, father," said Eppie tenderly. "That was what Aaron said. I could never think o' taking you away from Master Marner, Eppie. And I said, it'd be no use if you did, Aaron. And he wants us all to live together, so as you won't need to work a bit, father, only what's for your own pleasure, and he'd be as good as a son to you. That's what he said." "And should you like that, Eppie?" said Silas, looking at her. "I shouldn't mind it, father," said Eppie, quite simply. "And I should like things to be so as you needn't work much. But if it wasn't for that, I'd sooner things didn't change. I'm very happy. I like Aaron to be fond of me, and to come and see us often, and behave pretty to you. He always does behave pretty to you, doesn't he, father?" "Yes, child, nobody could behave better," said Silas emphatically. "He's his mother's lad." "But I don't want any change," said Eppie. "I should like to go on a long, long while just as we are, only Aaron does want a change. And he made me cry a bit—only a bit—because he said I didn't care for him, for if I did care for him I should want us to be married as he did." "Eh, my blessed child," said Silas, laying down his pipe, as if it were useless to pretend to smoke any longer. "You're all young to be married. We'll ask Mrs. Winthrop. We'll ask Aaron's mother what she thinks. If there's a right thing to do, she'll come at it. But there's this to be thought on, Eppie: things will change, whether we like it or no. Things won't go on for a long while just as they are, and no difference. I shall get older and helplesser, and be a burden on you, belike, if I don't go away from you altogether. Oh, not as I mean you'd think me a burden, I know you wouldn't, but it'd be hard upon you. And when I look forward to that, I like to think as you'd have somebody else besides me, somebody young and strong, as'll outlast your own life and take care on you to the end." Silas paused, and, resting his wrists on his knees, lifted his hands up and down meditatively as he looked on the ground. "Then you would like me to be married, father?" said Eppie, with a little trembling in her voice. "I'll not be the man to say no, Eppie," said Silas emphatically. "But we'll ask your godmother. She'll wish the right thing by you, and her son too." "There they come, then," said Eppie. "Let us go and meet them. Oh, the pipe! Won't you have it lit again, father?" said Eppie, lifting that medicinal appliance from the ground. "Nay, child," said Silas, "I've done enough for to-day. I think mayhap a little of it does me more good than so much at once." Chapter 16